that correct, Sophia?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so hello everybody. I have a giant blue screen, a blue room behind me. It's not real, it's a virtual background. My name is Lisa Kelly, and I'm a program manager with the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. And I work on a project called the Discoverability Network. And we're going to talk to you a bit about that today and some things around disability. Sophia, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Sophia Dritzis. I also work at the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, and I work very closely with Lisa. I'm a programs manager as well, and I help promote the Discoverability Network. So thank you for having us, and thanks for joining in.
Now, I am going to have to share my screen, or I'm going to jump into the screen to attack Kate and her Starbucks coffee, which is a cruel and unusual punishment in an afternoon. Sophia, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Great. So we're here today to talk to you about discoverability. And a large part of what makes our platform and how we help job seekers find work is about disability disclosure. So kind of talk about the two because they go hand in hand. We're going to send a copy of this deck out to Mary, and she can disseminate it to everybody who's interested. So there will be live links in it. So you don't have to take notes if you're not, if you just want to pay attention to what's going on. But feel free to take notes if you wish. Also, you can put your information into the chat or simply unmute to ask questions. I'm comfortable with either. If at any point you need an accommodation, if you need me to slow down, you speak very quickly, let me know and I will accommodate that. So welcome. A couple things before we get started. Both Sophia and I work for the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. And the Ontario Chamber of Commerce is over 100 years old. We have 155 local chambers of commerce and boards of trade that are members. And we work to develop tools and policies and programs that support business to prosper in Ontario. And so this program, Discoverability Network, which you'll see with these blue circles on the bottom left hand of the screen, is a program that was designed to connect the employers in our system, about 60,000 businesses, with talent who has a disability, because they believe that people with disabilities are either underemployed and also bring a ton of great skills to the workplace, great qualities in general. So they sign up, use this interface, the Discoverability Network, to connect. So we'll talk about how that works, and then we'll talk to you about some concerns probably around disclosure. Okay, so what are we going to talk about today? Well, obviously disclosure. What is it? Because a lot of people, in my experience, have some misunderstandings around disclosure. So we want to make sure we all know what we're talking about and that we're disclosing appropriately. Second thing is, should you or I have a disability, disclose? And that's going to be very personal, but I'm going to talk about some of the risks, but I'm also going to talk about some of the benefits. I think a lot of times in this space, we tend to focus on the risks because maybe we've had a bad instance when we're job searching and we disclose. But maybe people haven't shared the good news stories about when they disclose and things work well for them. And then just a general category called what do I need to know? So let's dive in. The Discoverability Network is found at www.discoverability.network. Exactly how it sounds. It's got 3 program parts. The first is a job matching platform. It's a piece of technology. On it, job seekers and businesses both create profiles, and the system matches them based on the skills, abilities, qualities, certifications, education that you put in there. So it removes a lot of unconscious bias that typical applicant tracking systems or job boards build into the system. Again, not necessarily intentionally, but just because of the way they work. All right. The second, so everybody on our platform, by the way, discoverability.network, has a disability. And all the employers on our system know that everybody on our system has a disability. So it eases some of the concerns around disclosure. Second, we offer free training. And that's a number of different pieces of training on everything from disability confidence to disclosure, which we're doing today, accommodations, job search, telling your story, how to find a mentor. But I also train businesses on how to build an inclusive workplace, how to recruit inclusively, what are their obligations under the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, and so on. Finally, we offer networking events where we connect you directly to businesses that are looking to hire people with disabilities. And we let you know about that when you're on our system. You get messages in system, and we can send out emails if you sign up for our monthly newsletter, which Sophia writes. Okay, to get started, you simply go to www.discoverability.network. It's free. It's free for you and for the employer. Sign up as a job seeker, and you'll look for a job or connect either through Find Job Opportunities or right here. So both of those are pathways to get you into the system where you can create an account or look to find jobs. All right. Any questions about that before we get into disability disclosure? Okay, I guess the only other thing I could say is we currently have a lot more jobs than we have candidates and a lot more job opportunities. So we're really looking and our employers are seeking candidates. So again, if you have a disability, I encourage you to sign on. Your account, once you create it, stays up, which is really great. So if you're like me, you can have an account for 5 years and just keep looking for better jobs that come up.
Can I
Don't
ask?
tell my boss. Yep.
Lisa, I just wondered, do you find that there are a lot of entry-level jobs? And I also wondered if there is a type of position that's most in demand.
Great questions, Mary. So it's actually a wide range of jobs. So I wouldn't say we have senior jobs. So if you're looking to be the president of the Scotiabank, they're probably not advertising that on our system. But if you're looking for an entry level or a mid-level position, there's a lot. So we right now, because of the labor market and COVID and what's happening, we're seeing a lot more entry-level jobs than we used to. So I would say we skewed more to like not a beginner, but like a novice jobs, novice to intermediate. Right now, I would say it's skewing more to like a novice to an intermediate. So a lot more entry level jobs than we're used to. But we have a whole range of jobs and across all different kinds of industries. So we've had, Sophia, what are some of the jobs? A lot of IT jobs, customer service and sales, I think, are always right up near the top.
We've had a lot of summer jobs as well.
Yeah, internships are posted. Yeah. We also have part-time, full-time, so you can decide which you want to enter by. We've had like somebody get a job as a researcher at a very, very large communications company. We've had people get jobs, doing with Bell Technical. So all kinds of different positions. So we're really not limited. And if I showed you a pie chart, you'd see it's pretty equally split. And if we look at the size of employer, it would be about half of them are small to medium-sized employers. So, actually over half. So most of our employers, half of them, almost half, are between 1 and 20 people. And then another quarter are about 20 to 50. And then the rest are 50 and above. We have charities, non-profit, government, private business. So there's just a ton of different kinds of jobs and different employers on the system.
Great. Thank
you. That's a good question. All right, let's jump into disclosure. So what is it? I throw that out rhetorically, seeing if you can answer me. Or not rhetorically, I'm actually asking you. What is disclosure? Does anybody have an idea? Okay, just while everybody takes a pause and thinks about that, when do we disclose? Anybody have any ideas on that? Again, type it into the chat or feel free to unmute, interrupt me. I have no problem with that, and add a comment. What do we disclose? How much information should we be giving? Why would you disclose? I always think that's the most important question. And who do we disclose to? So there's a lot more thinking that goes around this idea of disclosure than what we typically talk about. So let's dive down again into each of these and see if we can get some answers. I'm going to give you the accurate definition of disclosure. So disclosure is about sharing the changes we need in the workplace to do the primary parts of a job. And those changes are called accommodations. Disclosure is not, Sophia, can I get you to unmute and read what disclosure is not?
So disclosure is not sharing the diagnosis or details of your health condition.
Yeah, now I know Sophia's background is recruiting. I was an employment counselor helping, and I got to tell you, rarely did people disclose what I say appropriately. In fact, most people end up doing this, telling me all about their diagnosis, all about the difficulties in getting access to things, all about health conditions, private information that you are protected, from sharing. You do not need to share your private medical information with anyone other than your doctor or your medical professionals. But we don't want to do that with an employer because, frankly, it doesn't help your employer to know your diagnosis, and it doesn't help them to know the details of your health condition because they're not medical most of the times. I'm sure there's doctors that hire people, but most of the time, employers are not medical professionals. So it doesn't really help them to tell them the name of something because they still may not know what that means. So what they do need to know is, how does this affect you in the workplace, and what changes in the workplace, not at home, not in your personal life? What changes do you need so that you can do the parts of the job, the most important parts of the job that you were hired to do? Any questions about this? I'm going to give you some examples, okay? All right. So with that in mind, all right, this whole idea of disclosing, how might it affect your job search? You might need different tools, right? And that you would have to disclose. I require a tool to help me do the job. So Sophia, what's an example of a tool?
There's many different types of tools. So it could be something simple like, maybe like a screen reader.
Perfect. So perhaps even for an interview, if there was an assessment, a test, which is a common part of a lot of interview processes, you might need a screen reader to tell you what's on the screen if you had low vision or a learning difference, okay? It might affect how and where you look for jobs. Okay, when you look on some systems, if you disclose you have a disability, for instance, on LinkedIn, everybody who's in your acquaintance circle can look on and see that you have a disability. So that's why we created discoverability. It's very much like LinkedIn that you create a profile, but we keep it confidential so that you're not unintentionally disclosing to everyone. You're controlling the information and who knows where you're looking and how you're looking for a job. Disclosure, are you going to disclose or not? So actually, who am I going to tell? When am I going to tell them? What am I going to tell them? So that happens everywhere, from interviews right through to job offers, right through to being on the job. And finally, what accommodations do you need? So again, that could be everywhere from interview right through to, I've been working for a while, my situation changes and I need a different accommodation. So this whole idea of disability disclosure and understanding what we need to say, who we need to say, when we need to say, affects the entire spectrum of job search tools and affects our job search process. When you might disclose. So there might be different places you disclose. So you could disclose on a resume or cover letter. I'm generally not a huge advocate of that. And the reason is that it often looks disability focused instead of abilities focused. So a resume is designed to get us an interview. Okay. And having a disability doesn't guarantee you an interview. So if that's the purpose of those documents, why would we disclose in them? Now, if it was for a disability organization, then I might say I have lived experience. But generally, the resume's purpose is to get us an interview. So as an employment counselor, I would probably say, yeah, this may not be the perfect time, though again, it's up to you. We often, and I find this with people, disclose unintentionally, meaning we've posted something on Twitter or on our resume. Perhaps you volunteered at 20 different disability organizations, and that can send a signal to the recruiter or the employer that you have a disability, because why are you so into disability? Could also mean you have a family member, but people, might read into that more. Sometimes when we answer a question, we can unintentionally disclose as well. So in an interview, why did you leave your last job? Well, they wouldn't give me a screen reader, and you're unintentionally disclosing, though you're not actually, saying I have a disability and this is what I require. So we need to be aware of that. We might disclose when we're networking or introducing ourselves. Again, I think you need to be careful because employers hire people for their abilities. Employers hire you because they have a job that needs to be done. So that is why they're going to hire you. So that is what we need to focus on. Social media, I mentioned, clubs, volunteer work, or work experience can show us. I have a friend, her first couple jobs were all in the disability space. But again, an employer might look at that and go, well, why haven't you ever gone private sector before? Why are you working for nonprofits, all in the disability space? Now, time-wise, we might disclose before a job interview, when we start a job, after a work probation. We can disclose at any time. In fact, most people acquire their disability later in life. So the odds are they're going to disclose while they have a job, not before they start a job. You definitely should disclose when you need an accommodation. So if you need an accommodation or a change or a modification so that you can be the best you can be in an interview or the best you can be on the job starting from day one, ask for it. Otherwise, you're going to look like you're just not capable of doing the job, or there's some other issue and they might not associate that with a disability, and they might, look at your performance and give you a bad performance appraisal. And we also might disclose to mentors or in informational interviews. So there's lots of different places across this job search journey where disclosure affects us. Now, the decision to disclose is a personal choice. When I say that, Sophia, do you want to put that into English, what I'm actually saying?
Yeah, so basically that just means that it's your choice whether or not you want to disclose. You don't have to. But again, as Lisa said, if you require any supports, it's in your best interest to let the employer know what those are, just to help you perform the essential duties of your job. And without you saying so, they're not going to know what it is that you need.
Exactly. So again, it's your choice, but it can be affected by a number of things. So if your disability is visible, you might want to consider disclosing before the interview so you don't surprise someone. Generally, interviews are never a good place to surprise anyone, recruiters or bosses. So that's not the time to wear your hot pink leopard skin pantsuit with, 12 gold chains and a giant floppy hat. Okay, that's a bit of a surprise. Employers wouldn't normally expect that. So generally, we want to be remembered for the things, our skills and our abilities, our education or our work experience. We don't want to be remembered for things where they go, oh, there was that lady who was completely qualified for the job, or that lady who showed up in the hot, or the guy who showed up in a hot pink suit. Okay, one's a really good way to be remembered, one's not so ideal. All right. So if you have a visible disability and somebody might be surprised, or maybe they haven't prepared because you didn't ask for an accommodation and you make them uncomfortable, the worry is that that discomfort will embed into an unconscious bias and they may not, you may have made them uncomfortable so they won't consider your candidacy as positively. Okay. Doesn't always happen, but it could. So generally, my suggestion is if you have a visible disability and you require an accommodation, request one prior to the interview. If you have an invisible disability, again, up to you. However, if it's going to present during the interview, if it's going to affect the way you communicate, let's say you don't make consistent eye contact, or you're going to have a mannerism that's going to show up, then I might, again, because otherwise somebody's going to be going, why is this person doing that? All right. Your type of disability can affect your decision to disclose. So you may have a disability that is stigmatized, addictions, for instance, or sometimes mental health. So that may make you pause, and you need to weigh the pros and cons. But again, because we're not giving a diagnosis, you don't have to come in and tell them, I have, a drug and alcohol addiction. I would never suggest you do that. You might say, I have a disability, and then ask for whatever it is you need. Timing. So again, when? Well, it's all over the place. You can, up to you, disclose whenever you want, with two exceptions. If it affects your ability to do the job, you need to disclose. So if you had low vision and you're applying to be a TTC, Toronto Transit Commission driver, you need to tell people, okay? Because it affects, your ability to drive. Or if it affects health and safety of yourself or other people. So in both those instances, you are legally required to disclose. So it could, another thing that affects our decision to disclose is, do I need accommodation? Past experiences, a lot of us have had poor experiences when maybe we've disclosed and we think we didn't get the job because of that. In those cases, first of all, not everybody who gets an interview gets the job. That's just life. I have some people I'm coaching right now. They've gone through numerous interviews. They don't have a disability. They didn't get the job. So try not to make assumptions about why you did or didn't get a job. But generally, we have a few interviews before we get one. So it may or may not have had anything to do with disclosing a disability. Think about the context. Who is the employer? Are they sending signals that they are disability friendly? So Sophia, what are some signals that a company can send to show that they are open to hiring people with disabilities?
Well, they'll participate in diversity-wide events. They will have diversity programs. So you can see that on their website. If you look under the careers section, you'll see like sublinks to their diversity programs. So you would know that just from that as well.
They might have also, we're a diversity and an inclusive employer. Please apply if you're a diversity equity group, including people with disabilities. They might ask if you require an accommodation, please contact, and then it tells you. Those are all signals. They might show pictures of people with disabilities on their website or in their print materials. So look to see if there's signals. Now, the great thing is on our system, the employers all know that we are a disability job board, just regular jobs for people who happen to have a disability, so you can feel more confident with the employers that you earn interviews from on our system. Okay, why do we disclose? Well, that should say, how do we disclose? We do that to explain the impact of disability and what changes or modifications are needed. Now, the interesting thing about this is from both the employee or the job seeker's perspective and the employers, you're both nervous about it. You both feel like you're tiptoeing through a minefield. So it's not just you that's nervous. It's the employer too. The employer is worried about using language that you might find offensive, about asking a question the right way, about, they might be worried about, will I, have to provide an accommodation that I can't afford? That's rare, but everybody worries about that. There's a whole bunch of things the employer is worried, just like you are. You're worried about, well, maybe they won't hire me. Maybe they'll think I can't do the job. So you're both nervous. So hopefully after today and this discussion, you'll feel a little bit more comfortable going through and looking for a job. Okay, should you disclose? Well, completely up to you. But if you do, I'm going to encourage you to know what your skills and abilities are, including any adaptive skills that you've developed to manage your disability, and you could share those. You are legally required to disclose a disability if it relates to doing the primary parts of your job properly or to health and safety. And if your disability gets worse or your situation changes and say you hadn't disclosed previously, simply disclose in the future. Do we have a question?
Hi, I just wanted to include a comment in the chat. Lisa, I said I would try to keep on top of it, and I think it might be a time to mention what Jonathan had put in the chat, and because you're talking a lot about reciprocal, both on both sides, right? Trying to figure out the best way and time and so on. And Jonathan did say, I think, why disclose? To make sure we're getting proper treatment and to make sure we're putting the effort in.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan, for sharing that. Yeah, you should get proper treatment whether you have a disability or don't. That should just be a basic human right. You're right about that. And then to get the things that you need to be able to do your job well. So, or your interview as well as you possibly can. People should not hire us for how well we interview us. They should hire for how well we can do the job. So sometimes if we need something that shows a better self, allows us to be more comfortable, asking for accommodations for the interview is perfectly natural. Let's talk about the risks of disclosure. And these don't always come up. And a lot of these are in our heads or, our fears that have been, we project. Okay. Unconscious bias and stigma. That's very real. And that's probably the most common risk of disclosing. So somebody thinking you can't do the job, or it's going to be really expensive, or you only got hired because you have a disability. That's a common one. People don't understand how hiring works. Sometimes there's fear of negative consequences. Sometimes you may ask for something and not get what you asked for. That's particularly different from post-secondary to the workplace. So just so everybody's clear, you can ask for an accommodation, but you're not entitled to your preferred accommodation. So when I first started at the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, my preferred accommodation was a private office. My accommodation that I received was noise canceling headsets. It met my need to cut out the noise. So the gap was the noise, and the headset did it just as well as a private office. So in that case, and it turned out really, really well, I got my accommodation, just not the one that I asked for. Sometimes we can be worried that people will treat us differently or that our information will not be kept confidential. Now, in the case of people treating you differently and unconscious bias and stigma, I work a lot with employers to train their staff and their managers on how not to do this. All right, that's a large bulk of my job, is to go out and talk to employers about this and what kind of language they can use, what kind of policies they can put in place, what kind of systems will help them ensure that this doesn't become a barrier for the person with a disability who's working for them. Any questions on the risks? Okay, but there's value too. And this is the exciting point. And this one is particularly meaningful for me because I didn't start disclosing till I was quite a bit older. And the best thing about it is it lets you do your job. And that's, you can actually go ahead and do a job and get hired and get paid for it. People do things differently, and that's okay. Even people without disabilities do things differently. 95% of accommodations in the workplace are related to personal, family, and religious reasons, nothing to do with disability. So people are already getting accommodations in the workplace. This is nothing new. All right. Second thing is you'll do a better job because you're not acting or trying to fit in. So if you're spending all your time trying to pretend you don't have a disability and trying to pretend you don't need the accommodation you actually need, that means you're not doing your job as well because you're acting, you're expending a tremendous amount of energy. You're not necessarily feeling good about yourself or your workplace culture because you're spending all that energy trying to fit in. So when we're allowed to just be our authentic selves and people know what we need and we tell them, we can do actually a better job. And that's the difference between making do and productive engagement. And finally, and this is really important for companies, they can start planning to provide appropriate resources and supports. So I told you all that I have noise canceling headsets. At my husband's company, he heard me telling this story numerous times. This year, for ND Month, National Disability Employment Awareness Month, and as everybody's working virtually, everyone in his company got a set of noise canceling headphones to work at home because it made sense to him. It's like, I don't know if they have a disability, but that's a great, cool thing that a lot of people could benefit from. So, sometimes by talking about what we need, it becomes apparent that it would help not just me, but everybody in the company. Okay, how and what do you disclose? Well, start with this. I want you to start spending time thinking about where there's barriers, where you're having issues related to your disability. So I'm not talking about, I don't have a nice enough car to get to work in time. That's not a disability issue, okay? But it might be, I don't drive and I have to use public transit, and it's very, very difficult for me to get to work starting at 8:30 because I don't have a car and can't afford one, and I use a mobility device, all right? It might be that I am consistently disorganized because due to my disability, and then start thinking about, well, what changes would help me address that? So do I need a checklist? Do I need assistance in prioritizing tasks? Do I need my boss to check in more often? Do I need a buddy in the office? Do I need extra time to get into work? Do I need to work from home one day a week? So those would be examples of the barriers for those two particular barriers that I identified. Now, the changes that you need are called an accommodation. So the accommodation might be a checklist, might be a buddy in the office who checks in. It might be a late start. If you're not sure, you can ask people or do research. And it's really important that you have an idea of what your barriers might be before you start work. Because sometimes when we don't know and we don't attach it to a disability, it looks like bad work practice, workplace or work ethic. And that it's a problem with how we want to do our work instead of, oh, this is related to a disability and I just need to change. So ask your employment counselors or your accessibility center. Ask a disability consultant. Or, and I love this resource, look up the Job Accommodation Network's searchable online accommodations resource. Sophia, do you mind putting that in the chat? Maybe even a link. I think it's Ask Jan. But they've got a really good suggested list for some common disabilities. So you can get some ideas and start going, oh, that sounds like me. Maybe you just need a day timer or an electronic calendar, or who knows, there's tons of different things. Not everything's expensive. And, our minds always go on accommodations to, ramps and elevators. But actually most accommodations are a lot simpler and, are simply small changes to how we do things in the workplace. Accommodations are not extra. So don't let anyone, especially peers or friends, tell you that this is an extra. It's simply a different way. It allows you to do your job. We've been doing this for centuries. People call it management. It's changes to attitudes, processes, or the workplace so that you can do the job, just the essential parts. So sometimes there's parts of our job that we do, but aren't critical to the job. So an example for me is we make little flyers. Okay, I don't love it. So we could carve that off for somebody else to do it if, for instance, I had low vision or if I was colorblind. Okay, I'm still doing the main part of my job, which is training. Somebody else could do the smaller portions. Standards aren't lower, we just do them in a different way. So again, accommodations can address assumptions. So maybe some unconscious bias training, disability confidence training, getting people to check out the Harvard implicit bias test. There can be changes to the way we communicate. Maybe we like to receive instructions in writing versus really long internet meetings. It could be, or perhaps we need captioning or an American Sign Language translator. It could be changes to the tools. Sophia mentioned a screen reader. It could be a magnifying glass for small type. I mean, it doesn't have to be high tech either, right? And there's actually magnifying screens you can put down on information too. It could be an ergonomic workstation, an ergonomic keyboard. It could be large print on our telephone, our office telephone. It could be changes to our work environment or spaces. So maybe an accessible washroom or being moved closer to a washroom, closer to a light source if we have seasonal affective disorder. It could be a scent-free workplace. And finally, to processes. So when I say processes, maybe an alternate type of interview, flexible work hours, or even be able to work from home occasionally, which we're all doing now with COVID. Who do you disclose to? Well, your workplace manager or HR. In the case of an interview, you would disclose to the recruiter. All these people are required to maintain confidentiality. And if you agree to an accommodation for a job, not for the interview, have that written down. And it's called an individual accommodations plan, IAP. It's very common. It's similar to an IEP, only it's IAP. There's a great example of it, a template that you could download for free if you get an interview with a small employer who's not familiar on the Conference Board of Canada's Employer Toolkit. Here's some examples of accommodations. So perhaps we have somebody who is deaf, they work in customer service. So the barrier is not the diagnosis of deafness. The barrier is they communicate differently. So an accommodation might be captions, written words, writing it out, or an ASL interpreter. Another situation, perhaps a job seeker with anxiety who's interviewing and needs to complete a timed assessment. So the problem is the interview style or types. In this case, it's the timed assessment. So some of the accommodations could be no timed assessment or additional time and providing questions beforehand. Finally, let's look at maybe an employee with chronic back pain. Their workstation, the disconnect is their workstation isn't comfortable and there's not enough breaks in the day. And so the pain builds over the day. So some typical accommodations for that might be an ergonomic assessment, a sit-stand desk, sitting on one of those balls, balance balls, or frequent stretch breaks. Those can all be, different examples of accommodations, and they all range in terms of cost. How do you disclose a disability? Okay, I'm going to give you this little template and I'm going to give you an example. And I would suggest you practice this with your career center or your disability consultant or your employment counselor. Simply name the issue and state that it's related to a disability. You need to state that it's related to a disability, not the particular diagnosis, but just a disability, or people won't know why you're asking. So if I went into my boss and said, my chair's uncomfortable, I want a new one, they wouldn't know that it's because I have a disability, and then everybody in the office might start coming along and asking for it. So we need to say, I have a disability, my chair is extremely uncomfortable. Again, no diagnosis. They don't want to know if it's L4, L5, C4, C5. They don't need all that information, okay? They just have a disability and sitting for a long time makes my back uncomfortable. Share how it's impacting your work. So, it's uncomfortable, it's affecting my work. Discuss possible consequences if the issue is not addressed. I want to be able to do my job well, so I require an accommodation. And then it's best if you provide some suggestions or just discuss with the employer, talk about what that accommodation might look like. Remember, the employer gets to decide. So let's look how this would look like. I have a disability and I require an accommodation for the interview. Sorry. All right. I would prefer to receive the interview questions by email 1 hour before the session, and I would like additional time for assessments. No demands here, we're just saying what we'd like. Why? What are the consequences? Well, this will allow me to best present my skills during the interview. And then you talk with them. This is the negotiation part that happens. Yes, I'd be fine with receiving a written copy of the interview questions when I arrive 10 minutes prior to the start. And thank you for giving me an additional 30 minutes for timed assessments. So that's kind of how it works. Any questions about this? I would suggest you write it out, read it to a professional. So somebody from the employment center, somebody from the accommodations center, and ask for feedback. Okay, because you want it to be positive. There's a lot of ways you could say this where it wouldn't go well. I have a disability and I demand an accommodation under the law. I need you to give me the interview questions the day before. I don't want to do the test. You have to do this under the AODA, or I'll sue you, or I'll file a human rights complaint. That would be inappropriate disclosure and kind of not a great experience for the employer or the person interviewing you. Okay, what can the employer ask you in an interview? Well, they can ask you questions about your ability to complete the primary job duties. So they could say, a large part of our job, Lisa, is training people online. Can you tell us how you would do this or how you've done this in the past? Okay, that's valid. Lisa, a large part of the job is moving boxes from one room to another. Can you tell us how you do this? And I'd say, no, I can't actually, because I have lifting restrictions. Okay. They can ask about your ability to work night shifts, if that's part of the job, lift heavy items, or travel. Those are all, if they're bona fide requirements of the job, meaning they're part of the job and a necessary part, they can ask you about those things. And they can ask you if you have any physical or mental conditions that would affect your ability to perform job tasks. So again, they're not asking you to tell them what the disability is, but they're saying, do you have any physical or mental conditions that affect your ability to perform the job? What can you ask the employer if you disclose? Well, you can ask them, do you have some suggestions for accommodations? Make it a discussion. To me, that's the best. The world is when it's an ongoing discussion between. The employer can also ask you what limits or restrictions you have. So sometimes a lot of people think, well, you can ask my doctor, and you're getting a doctor's note. In that doctor's note, you don't get a diagnosis as the employer. You get just, this person is able to lift this much. This person is able to stand for this long. This person is able to complete these tasks, but not these tasks. And this is what we call functional limitations. And that is legal for an employer to know about that if it requires, if it assists them in providing an accommodation, right? In my experience, this isn't incredibly common, but they can ask if they need more information related to what you are able to do or not able to do and the limits of it, so that they can ensure that you won't be harmed and that you're also able to do the primary functions of the job. They are still not entitled to know everything about the medical condition or the diagnosis. Who decides? Well, we covered that. It's a process. So be flexible, offer suggestions, but the employer gets to decide. Now, they should also check in to make sure that that accommodation is working for you, right? So if the employer suggests an accommodation and it doesn't work for you, you should tell them. It's an ongoing conversation, because if our condition changes or the workplace changes or the job changes, or the disability changes, the accommodation may or may not work now. So that's why we have written plans, that IAP, and we can go back and refer to it and go, well, the headsets just aren't working for me all the time. Sometimes it's too noisy, in which case your manager might say, okay, on the days when it's very noisy, you can work from home or you can book out a private office. So you can have those ongoing conversations. It's not a one and done. Wanted to mention lastly, before we end, we are discoverability part of the magnet community. So you see this little M, magnets like this big red dot, and we're all little communities that come out of magnet. That includes Align, discoverability, and hire immigrants. So you can use the same password and email on each of these systems, but to be on ours, you need to sign in through our portal, even if you're currently a magnet user. I'm also going to suggest for everybody that's on the call today, consider signing up to the free Align tool. It connects you to different employers who are also looking for diverse candidates, but it bases it based on your career compatibility and what attributes and interests you bring to the job. So you complete a personality assessment and it matches you based on that. That's cool, but what's really cool is the report you get. And what I find is the report gives you a lot of language that you can use in your interviews, in your job search, in your resume, and just in understanding your own strengths and weaknesses. So I think it's a really good tool to help you identify potential barriers and the transferable soft skills you bring to the workplace. So encourage you to sign up for that one too. It's free. All right, questions. That's a lot of information. No, it covered everything, answered every possible question you have. Maybe we can turn the recording out now, so if people will have a private question, I can